Good evening. I am Sambamurthy, the Dean of the Wisconsin School of Business. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you to our next edition of the Badger Executive Talk. We started the Badger Executive Talk as a way to bring some of our successful alumni leaders in business to talk about their experiences and to provide their unique perspectives on leadership transitions and the management of business in these times. Today, our guest is Cheryl Stallworth, who is an MBA alum from the Wisconsin School of Business. After 25 years of experience in business, Cheryl has a unique and fun role today as a co-founder and leader of Shedlight, and we'll learn more about that. But before that, Cheryl also served in a range of leadership positions at Colgate Palmolive, Coca-Cola, Firefly. And in my conversations with her, I found that she has really got some very interesting and unique perspectives about marketing and brands and consumer insights. And of course, Cheryl is a member of my external advisory board where she keeps me honest and we have a lot of great conversations. Cheryl, welcome to Badger Executive Talk.
Thank you, Samba. I'm so honored to be here.
Thank you. Cheryl, when I first met with you, you introduced yourself as one of the, being among the first or among the first few Black women in the MBA program and in the MBA community. Yet here you are, 25 years later, you found your voice and you have great insights to share and you have navigated your way. So tell us about your Wisconsin journey. What brought you here and what is memorable about your experiences?
Yeah, well, I moved to Madison to become a radio announcer, and I worked at WIVA FM, and I understand it's still around. And I was going to be in radio and television. That's what I was going to do. But I guess I learned that it was a lot harder to live the life I wanted to live, working my way up through radio, and so I decided to go back and get an MBA. And I applied at UW. Okay, so I admit it. The money. I thought the money would be good, and so I applied at UW and got. I also applied to the consortium, so I'm a consortium fellow, a consortium for graduate study and management. And I was accepted and got in. And that's how I ended up at UW. And loved Madison, loved my experiences at the U. And in addition to being part of your advisory board, I was also on the board for the Center for Brand and Product Management for almost 10 years. So I've been hanging out. I use all this as an excuse to hang out in Madison.
I'm so glad that you it doesn't take much to persuade you to hang out in Madison. That's you're lucky. And
Not at all.
you mentioned the consortium, and that's something I learned after coming here. Not only were we one of the founding members of the consortium to advance diversity and underrepresented minority students in the MBA program, but we are currently back in a leadership position, and success of alumni like you really enhances our ability to attract more and more students like you into the program. When I introduced you, I said that you were among the earliest Black women to get an MBA. So, what was your journey like, and how did you find your voice? How did you find your way to move into the leadership ranks? What lessons did you learn?
Well, I think one of the things I did was made a lot of mistakes because you do, and you have to just kind of live with that. But
Yeah.
one of the things I learned, and I accredit this to my graduate school training, um, is to be prepared. So I was always a planner. I've always been a planner. I tend to probably over prepare, but it helps me feel calm about taking on new challenges. And I found the program in Wisconsin to be pretty rigorous. So you had to be organized to get through and get good grades. So I love that, and that has uh, done me well through the years. So I've always prepare. I'm a rehearser. I even rehearsed for this interview. um, but I also, through the years, being the first always brings challenges. And I think one of the things I had to learn very early was to set boundaries
Right.
on how I wanted to be treated. And I've been in situations, or I was in situations early in my career where things would happen. People would make statements because,
Mm.
you know, the 80s are pretty much ancient history. And the things that people did and said, even in the 80s, as
Yeah.
late as the 80s, you can never get away with that stuff now. And so I think I learned very early in my career to set boundaries, and to, if a person even more senior than me would say something, I kind of learned to pull them aside and let them know how I felt.
Right.
But that took courage, and I had to kind of learn to do that.
That's wonderful because you learned to be yourself, and I'm sure there must have been mailbox moments, but you
Oh,
persisted.
well, yeah. And, I think that one of the things that helped a lot is kindness.
Yeah.
So I grew up again in business in the 80s. There weren't that many women. There weren't that many Black people. And they were rough and tough kind of macho environments,
Right.
right? And so for me, that that's not who I am, and it didn't
Mhm.
really work for me. So I found that kindness was always a
Right.
good way to comport myself. And
Yeah.
as a leader, I remember the CEO of Colgate told me once that, you know, love is a greater motivator than fear. And I
Yes.
always remembered that, right?
Yeah.
And so when I started to lead companies or environments like Firefly, I tried to remember that, and I tried to bring out the best in people and create an environment that
Right.
people actually wanted to go to every day.
Yeah.
You know, we
Yeah.
had a lot of women,
Yeah.
and people were having babies. And so
Yeah.
I always wanted to create environments that nurtured the whole person,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
So those are kind of some of the things that were.
Yeah. 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 And actually, one of the things you told me once was that it's also important to teach people how you want to be treated, and how challenging is that? And
Oh, it's
how did
hard.
you
It's
succeed?
hard. Well, that's what I was saying, when there have been times when I had to say to my boss,
Right.
I can remember this. I had a boss. I went into her office. I sat down with her and I said, "In that meeting, I was very uncomfortable with the way you spoke to me, and maybe we can find another way for you to give me feedback."
Yeah.
And she was shocked, but it never happened again. It never
Partly
happened again.
because it was her implicit bias that she did not know what the implications would be.
Well, I just think, you just have to try to be honest.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's kind of the way I think about
Yeah. No,
things,
that's
you know.
very. I mean, that's holding true to yourself is an important part of it. Let's change the discussion to drawing upon the wealth of experiences that you've had in marketing and a very checkered journey with great companies. Um, what have you experienced and learned today when we think about brands, customer insight, and marketing, what are some major insights that have shaped your own journey and advice you would give to aspiring marketers, many of whom might be in this forum?
Right. Well, I think taking risks, being creative, trying new things, not being afraid to fail, all those basic sort of things that we need to do as people is important.
Yeah,
Um, I always enjoyed, when I was on the agency side leading Firefly, we always enjoyed the innovation process. We
yeah.
fed the innovation process. Um, we used, I'm into music, samba, so we used
Yes.
kind of jazz as our metaphor.
Right.
um, and what great jazz musicians do, and what great people in marketing do, is they master the fundamentals. Great jazz musicians, they can play anything.
Mm,
They master the fundamentals so that they can do improv and test the
mm,
boundaries. But
right.
you have to have the fundamentals. So that's kind of the way I thought about innovation. And so that's one thing. So it's being improvisational, trying
Right.
new things, taking
Right.
risks.
Right.
But also I found with consumers, co-creation is critical, right? Because
Yeah.
people don't want you to broadcast to them. That's
Yeah.
old school. And one interesting way that we use that idea of improv in Firefly, was that we developed a joint venture with the Second City, which is the famed improv theater
Yeah.
in Chicago. Tina Fey from Saturday Night
Yeah.
Live came out of Second City. Dan Aykroyd, a lot of really famous people, Stephen Colbert. And so we developed something called Brand Stage, where we brought consumers and actors together to uh, develop early stage ideas.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was amazing,
Yeah.
because when you use improv actors and you bring consumers in, the people start laughing. And when people laugh, their guard is down, they're
Yeah.
more creative. So it's a really effective, fun way of co-creating and sparking new thinking. And so that's, to me, a great example
Yeah.
of what you can do in marketing if you're willing to kind of go outside of the traditional ways of thinking about how to get information from consumers.
Almost like rather than talking at your consumers, engaging them in conversations, and the relationships and the brand identity emerge through those conversations.
And there's a lot of technology that allows you to do that today,
Right. Right.
creating videos and things
Right.
like that,
Right.
you know. So
The
that's
other thing
that's
I've
kind of
heard
the
you,
way I think
yeah,
about it.
right. The other thing I heard you say, I found this fascinating, is said that people trust brands more than they do governments. Can you talk a bit about that and what does that mean?
Yeah. Well, the Edelman Trust Index was released several years ago, and that's exactly what it revealed. And I think that, I mean, the reason that people trust brands probably more than government now is that government in many countries, including the United States, has been a bit dysfunctional, right?
Right.
And brands, interestingly enough, usually have strong leadership, a
Mhm.
strong mission. They're consistent. You know what you're going to get. You have your brands you love, your go-to brands that you love, and you can rely on them. Good brands are reliable. Good brands reflect popular culture. So I think that that's why brands tend to be trusted more than government now, you know?
Interesting. Interesting. And which gets us to this notion that good brands, as you said, evoke benevolence. And the idea of brand purpose is acquiring greater meaning. Do you have some stories from your experience about brands building a sense of benevolence and building a trust within consumers?
Yeah, I do, and I want to come to that. I think that brands and companies, and I'll talk about brand purpose
Mhm.
in a little bit because I sort of have a definition that we cobbled together. But
Yeah.
brands and companies have a great opportunity, um, but they have to, uh, in this environment, they have to view employees and consumer needs in context, take into account their lives, their culture, their social challenges, because people aren't consuming brands in isolation, right? For example, when the social justice movement erupted last summer after the killing of George Floyd, companies were challenged. They had to understand the impact of that moment on their consumers and their employees as citizens,
Yeah.
right? And I think one of our board members said that he had a meeting with some of the Black employees within his company, and he was shocked at some of the things he heard, right? So companies have really got to listen and kind of bring all voices to the table, right?
Right.
So I think that that's important. We hear a lot about diversity and adding diversity to boards to make that happen. But I think it's more than that. A lot of people that are on boards are all part of an elite bubble,
Yeah.
not to besmirch people on boards. And it's great to have diverse boards.
Yeah.
It's critical.
Yeah.
But you got to bring a lot of different voices to the table. And I think that's what some of the leading companies are starting to do.
Yeah.
And they're developing metrics for how to think about things like
Yeah.
stakeholder value.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk about brand purpose, because you said that, over your experiences, you have a particularly unique view of brand purpose, and how your experiences at Colgate in Latin America gave you some unique insights that we should all take to heart. And as marketers, I'm eager to hear that story.
Okay. Well, okay, so the way I think about brand purpose is that it's a reason for a brand to exist beyond making a profit, right?
Yeah.
Making a profit is important, but it's also important for brands to make a contribution to consumers and to broader society. And a great purpose, if well executed, provides a foundation for every experience. And it's the underlying essence that makes the brand relevant and necessary and part of the culture.
Right.
And there are certain brands that do that really well, right? And we know that these brands will perform better in the market.
Right.
And many times can charge a premium. So that it's not that you're being benevolent for the sake of benevolence. And a good example of that is Colgate. You talk about Colgate. I spent a lot of years with Colgate, spent years in Latin America. And Colgate is all about promoting healthy smiles. And in their Latin American division, they have market shares that exceed like 75%.
Wow.
Nobody has a 75% market share.
Yeah. Right.
And the way they got that market share was really, really smart. And it was long before anybody was talking about brand purpose in the formal sense. For about 50 or 60 years, they instituted oral health education programs. They instituted school sampling programs where they would give, over the course of many years, millions of samples of Colgate toothpaste out, Colgate toothbrushes, and they would teach children about good oral health in schools.
Mm.
And they would partner with organizations like Dentists Without Borders throughout the region. And today, you go to a lot of Latin countries and they are synonymous with oral health. And people don't say, may I have a tube of toothpaste? They say, dame un colgate, know? And they have incredibly high loyalty levels. And to me, that's a situation where you're doing something that's really good socially, but you're also building your brand.
Yeah. That's interesting, because in a certain sense, they they were what we hear a lot of businesses do today, be a force for good. And by combining oral health as the focus, and then the brand is part of that conversation, and this is certainly a unique perspective because today businesses are recognizing that profit and a force for good don't have to be contradictory to each
Mutually
other.
exclusive.
Yes, absolutely.
And I just want to, there's probably a lot of students.
Yep, there are.
Hopefully there are a lot of students on this call. I just want
Yeah.
to say that I'm not an expert in this, but I've been doing a lot of studying and reading, and there are just a couple of sources that I think might be useful for people. The Aspen Institute has a business and society program,
Mm,
and it's become one of my go-to sources. They have a lot of things online, and their founder and executive director, Judy Samuelson, has just written a new book called The 6 New Rules of Business: Creating Value in a Changing World.
right.
And the other book that they have been touting is Rebecca Henderson's book,
Of
Reimagining
course.
Capitalism,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you want to find out more about what companies are doing and what
Yeah.
we can do, those are two good sources I just wanted to mention for
Yeah.
folks.
Those are certainly very good. You and I talked about Rebecca Henderson's book. And in fact, since this is Wisconsin School of Business, I'll put in a plug. We are in the process of developing that course, which is about business and society, and taking that a broader sense about shareholder value and a stakeholder perspective, including sustainability, society. I think that's certainly, every day we hear about another company committing to that. So it's a force that is irreversible. And looks like you got a precursor through what you observed through Colgate experience in Latin America.
I think so. I think so.
So, Cheryl, there is a Chinese curse which says, may you live in interesting times. And certainly it looks like we are living in interesting times. We have seen COVID, the vaccine is there, and maybe we see the light at the end of this tunnel. We have seen the Black Lives Matter movement. We have seen greater polarization of our society. So we are at this moment in time where it seems like there are all these tectonic shifts and forces moving at a much more accelerated pace. And the question is, what does that mean for us as leaders? What should we
Well,
be thinking?
yeah, I think that's a hard question. And, personally, I also think there's a lot of pitfalls, right? And we're kind of
Yeah,
all learning as we navigate these massive shifts. Um, I don't feel that leading companies have the luxury of sitting on the sidelines and waiting for the moment to pass so that I can get back to business as
right,
usual.
right,
Because I don't think there's going to be business as usual anymore.
right.
Um, so, I think we've talked about purpose, and a great way to move forward is to find that purpose by bringing that myriad of voices to the table, right, in order to execute the purpose. So that's kind of the starting point. Um, I also, just as an aside, I think it's interesting to watch what companies are kind of beginning to do on their own, and I think it takes a fair amount of bravery, right?
Mm,
Um, we saw, what was it, last week or the week before, things moved so quickly.
yeah.
The decision of companies to withhold political contributions,
Yes.
right? I was shocked at that. I didn't think I'd ever see that in my lifetime. So I think companies are saying, wait a minute, we have to take a stand, and we don't want to do damage to our consumer base, right? We don't want to be a part of that. We don't want to
Right.
contribute to that.
Right.
I don't think any brand wants to do that. It's just not smart. So I think what I'm seeing companies do, and it's big companies and small companies, it's nonprofit, it's for profit. this is a moment of innovation, I think.
Right.
So it's not just about sticking a Black Lives Matter banner on your website and saying, okay, I'm done. It's
Yeah.
really about trying to understand the market and how you need to go to market differently, right? And I think that just like anything else, may you live in interesting times is true,
Yeah.
but interesting times always presents an opportunity. And one of the futurists that we've interviewed said that we haven't seen this much value change since the late 60s. And so what we saw after the late 60s was incredible innovation, right? So I think we're entering an era of new ideas. And I find that to be very exciting. We spoke to a young woman earlier today who has the idea of using empty malls to create local manufacturing spaces and showrooms
Interesting.
in the fashion arena. And apparently, this is already being done in China.
Mm.
So it's to bring some local jobs to stimulate the economy. And I think it's going to take ideas like that
Right.
for us to move forward.
Yeah.
Does that answer your
Yeah.
question?
Yeah. I mean, there's so much room for creativity. I think what you're saying is we tend to seek big ideas, but there's so many small ideas that are right there before our eyes. I mean, your example of malls is perfect because you drive around and we are seeing the emptying of the malls, and the pandemic has certainly accelerated that trend. But is that it, or is there other opportunity? The example you gave is a great one, and it's a way to spur local entrepreneurship, local business. So that's a very interesting example. One of the I recall when we first got introduced to each other, and you talked about shed light, and you said something about shed light that stuck with me, which is that you define shed light as social impact consultant. It took me a while. I'm always sometimes slow to catch on as to what that meant.
I don't think so. I doubt
Thank
that.
you. So we were talking about this recently, and you said, and then I realized that we are in a polarized society, but that's not altogether bad. The question is, what are we doing about it? And how are we hearing the voices? And that's what I believe you see as the purpose of Shed Light, that
Yeah,
as we live in societal divides, how do we hear the voice of the consumer? So
that's
can you
right.
tell us a little bit about social impact consulting and Shed Light?
Yeah, sure. Well, I spent a long time in marketing brands, right? On the agency side, on the client side. And I just reached a point where it was time to make a change. We were talking about that earlier. And I think that over the last 4 or 5 years, I've been really troubled by the path we're going down as a country.
Mm,
The divisiveness. And I believe that part of the power to create change lies in us as individuals, regular folks, and that we don't always have. I mean, I know somebody that runs a food bank. She said, it's not always about Washington.
yeah.
It's what can you do in your own life and in your own community. And so that's what I was called to do in my own head. And there's a lot going on up here. And so I thought I knew a lot about people. I was in consumer insights, but we always as marketers think we understand the American
Yeah.
zeitgeist. Well, I felt that I was wrong. My partner, Melissa Doherty, and I felt that we were wrong, that we really didn't know as much as we thought we knew. Hey, Melissa, got to do a shout out.
There you go.
Um, and so we did a study in 2017 with Firefly, the
Yeah.
the fragmentation in America. It was called Fragment Nation.
Yeah.
And, we heard from individuals talked about the fact that, individuals say that we are coming apart at the seams. And so what Melissa and I discovered was that, millions of people, like 120 million people, are struggling to make ends meet. And their stories are buried in metadata and media sound bites by people who aren't really of those communities. They tend to
Right.
be, media people tend to be part of the privileged class. And so it became our obsession to share the stories of these people.
Yeah.
And 120 million is a lot of people.
It is.
And it's a very diverse group of people. And so we wanted to help companies and nonprofits focus on those people in a really purpose-driven way. And, and we use storytelling to get there. So that's how we
Yeah.
came up with the idea for Shed Light.
And that's fascinating because you did say that, we tend to have the metadata. We kind of hear voices, but the real voices are here. And going back to your earlier idea of brands should have conversations, right? The conversations are not flying at the 40,000 level, but those are individual conversations. So it is certainly a very insightful approach to looking at business problems and finding those voices despite the divide. And maybe it's not so bad when we start listening, hearing those voices.
Well, it's really interesting because, what we do is, and now we have to do it virtually, but we take people on road trips, it's ethnographic. And we have a lot of different methods
Right.
for immersing audiences into culture. But we do these home style, movies, video essays that, give us a through line into culture and help spark better decision making. So that's what we do. And we just completed a 6-part video web series called Of Many One. And it reflects the views of everyday people and thought leaders on what it means to be sliding out of the middle class economically. What's going on with the social justice movement in my own head and their own heads.
Right.
And how can business, to our earlier conversation, give more power to the people?
Right.
Yeah. So that's
yeah.
That's what we're doing.
And it is fascinating and important because, as we know, in marketing, with the trend being so much of big data and mining of insights, what I find fascinating about your approach is that let's not lose sight of those qualitative insights, those voices, which give meaning to the data. And it's about really marrying the two. So that's certainly a valuable way to think about it. The other element of your leadership journey is you're a global traveler. You've been in many places, and you and I have shared many stories about our favorite eating places in Singapore, Beijing, Hong Kong, and ultimately, global travelers, their conversations end up being about food and eating places. But what does a global mindset mean to you, Cheryl?
Yeah. Well, I think it used to be just growing, right? That's how you were going to get your growth,
Right.
especially in the developing world. And I think it's important to continue to focus on global growth opportunities. But with coronavirus, I think it's important for brands to figure out how they can take a leading role in contributing to countries that have lost so much during this pandemic. We know that it's going to be a long time before a lot of people in the developing world get vaccines.
Right.
So what does that mean? And I think that I heard the other day that the world is glad that our strategy on coronavirus has changed and that we can assume more of a leadership position. And I don't mean that in the let's take over sense, but I just think that we as business people are like ambassadors.
Yeah.
I live in other countries and man, you're an ambassador. You represent your country. So I think that we can help restore some of the gaps that have
Yeah.
existed. And so I think that's, so it's the usual growth things, but it's all those other things that go along with being
Yeah.
part of part of the global community. I
Yeah.
think that's important.
Yeah.
Um, but I also think it's important to focus at home.
Yeah.
We talked about this.
Right.
You hear a lot of nonprofits that are focused on, let's develop clean water programs in Africa. And I think that's really important.
Yeah.
And we should do that. But man, we need clean water in the United States.
Yeah.
And so we have some of the counties in the United States are like developing countries.
They are.
If you go to Pine Ridge out in South Dakota, I mean, and you don't even have to go to South Dakota or Mississippi. You can go up the road here. I live in the Northeast. You can go to upstate New York. So we also, as people, it's back to the malls and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
gotta focus at home a little bit too as business people.
No, that is for sure. Just like you, I lived in East Lansing, so Flint was not too far off, and the idea that we could have Flint was an eye opener. We are seeing so much income disparity in our country, and so being good at global solutions, how can we now bring them home? You and I talked about the term that people have used, glocal, being simultaneously global and local. I think it's beginning to take on more meaning, doing well in your own neighborhood. The
I
vaccine is a
agree.
good example. I mean, there are countries which seem to have done a better job, perhaps, at this point in time in distribution. But
Yeah.
uh, there is no, there's always a wealth of ideas from different places, and how can we pool them together? But I hear what you're saying about the being a U.S. citizen or being a U.S. company. There's an implicit sense of leadership in a good way, and not in an imperial way. But by the same token, can we take those lessons and bring them to bear on our local solutions? A lot of promising opportunities for young business leaders to balance the between being global and being local. Cheryl, another important topic which is very timely, but you have lived it, is all these conversations we are having in universities, in businesses, and society, is diversity and inclusion.
I
How do
know.
you
It's
find
like,
your voice?
boy, it is really a hot topic, isn't it?
It is quite a hot topic.
Yeah,
And
I sometimes it's like overkill, right? But I actually I'm sorry, were you I didn't mean to
no,
that
because
topic just
you have a wealth of insights. So I'm curious to hear your lived experience of
yeah,
navigating the journey between aspiration and reality versus the
yeah,
threading the needle.
yeah. Well, I think diversity is really an interesting topic, right?
Yeah,
And I'm glad that we as a society, and it's not just us, it's global, are really focused on this area and focused on um, policing and all those big issues that we're trying to solve. I think it's a couple of things. On a micro level, I think it's important if you're in an environment and you're maybe one of few.
yeah,
I really think it's important to be yourself and bring your voice. And man, people want to hear it now, you know, so it's a good time. I think it's a good time to be in a diverse population because
yeah,
I think people do want to hear your voice. At least that's what my positive head says to me. I think you have to be proud of who you are, you know, and all those things. It's so important to companies. And I think it's not just about diversity, ethnic diversity. I think it's about diversity of thought and
Yeah.
intellect. To me, that's critical. And we live in a society, you know, with the divisions we were talking about, where if you have a different point of view, you know, people kind of, they shut you out. And so I feel that you and I have talked about this. I feel like the diversity conversation has to include the racial conversation, but to go beyond the racial conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, you know, there's a woman, you know, we interview a lot of people at Shed Light. There's a woman that we interview named Loretta Ross. You guys should check her out. She's there. The Times did an article on her, and she's been on shows, TV shows. And she talks about calling in the call out culture. So it's about, I think part of diversity is about listening to other people who you might not agree with an open heart.
Yeah.
So that you can suspend your agenda and understand where they're coming from. And for me, that is going to help us culturally, racially. I mean, we're shouting at each other.
Yeah.
We have got to find a better way to have conversations with people we don't agree with. Yeah. And I've heard some things that when we interview people within Shed Light, I've heard some things that are really hard to hear.
Yeah.
But you gotta listen to people and understand what in their background may have informed that point of view.
Yeah.
You know?
That's interesting. You know, when I think about your journey, and you and I've talked about this, you said that one of the important lessons you'd like to pass on is get out of your bubble. Don't be afraid to be an imposter, and it's okay to be restless. So, what lessons would you offer? How do you be an imposter? How do you get out of the bubble? How can you be restless? What advice would you give to the young aspiring Badger leaders?
Yeah, I would say that people shouldn't be imposters, right? But, you know, I think, and we talked about this earlier, I think a lot of our students are between 23 and 30. Is that about right?
Yeah, most of them.
So I think you have to take chances and pursue what fuels your passion and find those sparks and let that shape your career and your life. Because I guarantee you, at 23 to 30, you're not going to make a lot of mistakes.
Yeah.
Even if you take the wrong job, you're just not, right?
Yeah.
So I think that you gotta just find those things that really you love.
Yeah.
And I don't think things are ever predictable. So you have to know everything that you encounter, good or bad, is meant to move you forward. Yeah. You know, that thing, like you just stop and you say, okay, what can I learn from this experience?
Yeah.
And then, and this is related to the diversity thing. So I don't know if this is, but this is something that I always kind of keep in my mind. Expand your base of relationships.
Yeah.
Learn about a lot of different people, learn about a lot of different cultures, travel, get your backpack and travel. And I always think that as executives, we can always learn by getting friends who aren't like us. That's a big thing with diversity.
That's a big thing. Yeah.
I always tell people, get some friends that didn't grow up the way you did, that may not be, you know.
Right.
Just like
it's interesting you say that. I have always challenged myself every few years, reintroduce yourself to new people. And it can be intimidating, but it can be enriching. So, Cheryl, our conversation seems to have triggered a lot of questions. So let's go to the audience. So here's a question for you from Steve. Hi, Steve. How do you balance the move to being more inclusive and promoting it without risking being accused of just piling onto the moment and whitewashing. Call it like you see it, Steve.
Oh, wow. Without being accused of just piling onto the moment and whitewashing.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know if I know what you mean by whitewashing, Steve, but
I think
I'll
he
take
probably, the question is more, I mean, how do you balance the move to being more inclusive without risking being accused of
yeah,
just piling on,
yeah,
right?
yeah, without like being seen as jumping on the bandwagon.
Absolutely. Yeah, something like that.
Gotcha. I gotcha, Steve. That's a really good question because I think, but you know what I think, Steve? I think a lot of people are just jumping on the bandwagon, right? But as a leader, which you are, I think that you, if you make a suggestion around diversity and inclusion, then let that suggestion be informed by something that you feel strongly about. And, do your homework, make sure that you're clear on what your suggestion or your goal is. And as long as, remember, I talked at the beginning about being prepared, as long as you're prepared
Yeah.
and you have your point of view, I wouldn't worry about how people are going to take it. I think you have to be true to you. That would be my point of view. Be true to you. And the fact that you asked me that question tells me that you've given this some thought.
Yeah.
And so do your homework, understand why you make whatever recommendation or whatever comment you're making. And if people push back, good, understand why, interrogate it, and you'll always get to a better place. But I don't think anybody's going to punish you for having a certain point of view right now. I hope
That's well
that,
said.
Samba, do
Yeah.
you think that's fair?
I do. I mean, that's what being authentic is about, right? I mean, if this is something you've not been ever thinking about, then take the time to first change yourself before you do that. And even if it takes time, that's a more authentic approach. So I agree with you. Cheryl, is there a particular company or brand that you're watching today that is behaving similar to your Colgate's experience about social responsibility?
A lot of companies are doing different things based on the challenges that they face in their industry. You're seeing banks increase people's pay, and I think that's great. I think we saw that with Chase Bank, and I think some of the insurance companies like Aetna are doing that.
Yeah.
When I think about companies that seem to operate with a good purpose, and I think they've had their challenges, certainly in the manufacturing area, I kind of like Nike,
Yeah.
and I like Nike because they they have really focused on sustainability. They have focused on diversity. They took a stand that was quite, I don't want to say risky, but I thought it was brave when they backed Colin Kaepernick.
Yeah.
Isn't he a
Yeah.
Wisconsin guy?
Yeah.
And I think that they knew who their target was, and I think they're very responsible socially, and I just like the way they articulate racial issues. And I think they're real about it. You may disagree, but you have to admit that they are true to who they are, right?
And it's also been interesting. There have been examples in the last 1 year with the pandemic. Companies taking on a more humane approach to work from home. What does it mean for your customer when the customer does not have the affordability to pay? And I'm sure that there are numerous examples that will, to me, the biggest heartwarming element has been how many companies have come together as a collective to help the underprivileged people tide through these times of economic distress, knowing that there will be the other side, and how we get there is as important. So interesting times. There is a question for you from Laura. How have you seen someone display everyday leadership in your teams among people in your organizations? Any other shed light or
Um,
elsewhere?
yeah, well, Shed Light is pretty small and it's a startup, but when I think about everyday leadership in Firefly, um, we were a boutique agency, and the thing that I think we did really well was use this method of managing that's very Socratic. So, you ask a lot of questions and you get everybody to kind of a better place, and a place that all of us can agree to march in the same direction on with respect to issues. And I think the leadership that I saw in people was to speak truth to me. I was a CEO, and we created an environment where they would disagree, and we disagreed respectfully. But I think everyday leadership is about having your point of view and
Okay.
being able to tell people when you don't have the same point of view as they, at whatever level of the organization. To me, that's leadership, because you always get to a better place. And no CEO or no boss has all the answers.
Right.
So that everyday leadership to me is all about speaking truth,
Right.
speaking your own truth.
Right. Interesting. Here's a question from Aaron, Cheryl. As a leader, how do you appear confident but not arrogant?
Oh, Samba, I think you should answer that question, because you
Thank
are the most open, one of the most open leaders I've seen. Can I toss that one to you, or do you want me
Well,
to take?
thank you. I think it's like what you and I talked about. It's about truly believing that you are part of a community. And so my experience at Wisconsin has been that it's a team, but it's actually a community. And it's interesting because last March, if you had told me that we are going to pivot nearly 400 courses online within 4 days, I would have said, well, maybe I withdraw my job application. but, but not only did we did it with grace, and we did it with the spirit of it is stressful. Right? So, but to me, the important thing was, do you truly believe in the power of others versus that? And it's very hard because I've worked with bosses who have felt that if we do not put my hand onto every decision, then I cannot trust it's being done. So it is challenging. It is challenging.
Yeah. But I mean, one of the things you made me think of is I've been in situations, um, Aaron, where, you lay out your plan, right? We do that all the time as leaders. Um, but I think one of the tricks is to check in with people. Like if you're
Yes.
sharing a plan, you check in and you say, hey, does that sound right? Do you have any suggestions? Have I missed something? And that to me is a great demonstration of confidence without being arrogant. So,
Indeed.
and that's what you do really well, Samba, when we're on our board meetings. You'll have a plan, but then you'll ask us for feedback,
Right.
and you'll take that feedback. And I think that feedback is, Aaron, I hope this is helpful. I think that that feedback loop can give you that collaborative
Indeed.
approach versus an arrogant approach.
Indeed. And I would imagine that, we've all had role models who did things well, who did not do well. And in my lifetime, I've tried to have those role models in mind. How would they handle it? So that's part of the richness of experience that you have had over your journey. And I'm sure you have a catalog of who did what well and what can I take away from that. Let's get to Brian. His question is, what would you consider best practices for attracting a diverse workforce to an organization?
Whoa, that's we're going through that now, aren't we, Samba?
Yes,
Um,
yes,
well, you know, I can only share my experience. I think that part of what will attract a diverse workforce, and this may not be what you want to hear, but I really think you have to have a few people, several people that represent a diverse workforce at the top of an organization, because you can't attract people if they don't see diversity modeled within that organization. So I think it starts at pretty senior levels. And at Firefly, we had a really diverse team. And I think that one of the things that happened was, that people saw that the organization had a lot of senior people, Latino people, Black people, LGBTQ people. And so that bred more diversity, because people felt like, hey, if I go to work there, there'll be some other people like me.
right,
So I
right.
really do think you have to start at the top,
Okay.
you
No,
know?
that's true. We've talked a lot about this tone at the top, right? Because without that, you can't ask people to do what you're not doing.
Hmm.
Cheryl,
You
this
have to
has been a
model
great conversation, and I do believe that there's a book coming written by Cheryl. So,
it.
Cheryl Stallworth on leadership. What's the title of that book likely to be?
Okay, the title of the book, I couldn't come up with, well, I have one, but it's probably not what you're expecting. The title on leadership that I would probably write is that you can't always get what you want, but if you try sometimes you get what you need. That's
There you
probably too long. I'm a
go.
Rolling Stone fan,
Yeah,
and the reason I picked that is that, first of all, I love Mick Jagger, but second of all, um, I think that in business, you don't always get what you want. You do hit stumbling blocks, but every single one of those stumbling blocks is a lesson. And that's very Buddhist, I think. It's a lesson. And you needed that lesson, and you needed to stumble at that time to get where you were going. And I told well, I worked for Coke, and there
yeah,
was a great CEO at Coke named Roberto Goizueta.
yeah, yeah.
And the school, Emory, is named
Emery,
after him.
yes.
And he said, you only stumble if you're moving. And so I always kept that in my mind. So I think,
Yeah,
so it
yeah.
would be that great Mick Jagger song.
You made me think of I can't get no satisfaction, but I try.
Yeah. And so this is great. This has been great. Thank you so
Wonderful.
much. Thank you.
Cheryl, it's
Oh, can
been
I plug our Story Slam? Shed
sure.
Light, you guys, is having a Story Slam on February 23rd. There, it's going to be music. It's going to be some really cool things. Follow me on LinkedIn. I will accept your following. I guess there'll be like 100 people following me on LinkedIn. But and we're gonna post something in a few days on the Shed Light Story Slam. I'm sorry I had to get that in, Samba.
No, no, it's perfectly fine. Cheryl, I knew that this was going to be an entertaining conversation, and it was a fascinating journey, and we ended it on Mick Jagger. So thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Great, and thank you all. And Samba, I'll speak with you soon. Take care.
Absolutely. My
Bye
pleasure.
bye.
Bye bye. Well, that was Cheryl Stallworth. I hope that you found her journey, her insights to be fascinating. I have gotten to know Cheryl for more than a year now, and I find her a trove of great stories. And I hope you enjoyed the evening. Uh, don't forget to join us for our next speaker, Erickson Chan. Erickson is currently the Group Chief Information Officer and Digital Officer of Zurich Insurance Company. And he's going to come to us most likely from Zurich or from Hong Kong. We'll find out. So once again, thank you for joining us and on Wisconsin.